Open any health forum today, and you'll hit a wall of contradictions. The carnivore crowd insists heavy meat consumption is the ultimate medicine, while popular plant-based documentaries claim that same steak is highly toxic. The baseline numbers offer no clarity either. The FDA recommends a minimum protein intake of 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. Meanwhile, fitness influencers demand double that amount for muscle growth, and longevity experts advise severe restriction to slow down aging. The stakes behind these numbers are entirely physiological. The specific source and absolute quantity of the protein you consume directly dictate your cellular aging process, your long-term risk of heart disease, and your daily metabolic function. This leaves the average person in a dangerous dilemma. How do you know whether you should eat a lean steak to fix your blood sugar or switch to black beans to protect your heart? Framing food as a moral binary of good versus bad is a trap. To actually optimize your health, you have to abandon the dietary tribes entirely and look directly at the clinical evidence driving both extremes. The origin of this modern debate traces back to two highly credentialed scientists. On one side is Dr. Loren Cordain, former professor and architect of the Paleo diet framework, representing the high-protein, evolutionary approach. On the other side is Dr. Colin Campbell, professor emeritus at Cornell University and lead researcher of the Massive China Study, representing the low-protein, epidemiological approach. This comparison matrix illustrates the massive scale of their disagreement. Cordain recommends drawing 20 to 35% of your daily calories from protein, primarily through lean meats. Campbell advises a strict 8 to 12%, sourced exclusively from whole plants. The gap between an 8% minimum and a 35% maximum is enormous. It's rare in clinical science to see two world-class experts arrive at such wildly opposing mandates. Yet both scientists are pulling from valid, peer-reviewed human health data. The divergence happens because they are looking through entirely different lenses. One prioritizes ancient evolutionary survival, while the other prioritizes modern whole-diet epidemiology. Cordain's model relies on natural selection. His core premise is that human nutritional needs were shaped strictly by our environment, with heavy meat consumption acting as the central catalyst for our development. The archaeological evidence backs this timeline. We have found stone tools specifically used for butchery and marrow extraction dating back approximately 2.6 million years. Ethnographic data confirms this pattern. Out of 229 studied hunter-gatherer societies, the median caloric intake from animal foods sits securely between 55 and 65%. Clinically, feeding the human body Cordain's recommended 20 to 35% protein load produces highly measurable outcomes. It drastically increases satiety, maximizes lean muscle retention, and improves overall insulin sensitivity. Cordain notes one specific caveat. Processing this much protein does not harm bone health, but only if your calcium intake is strictly maintained to offset what you excrete in your urine. The evolutionary model proves that high-protein, lean meat is a high for short-term metabolic optimization. The flaw in the framework is the timeline. Surviving to reproductive age in the Paleolithic era does not mean your body is optimized for an 80-year modern lifespan. Campbell completely rejects the evolutionary lens. Instead, he focuses on massive, modern, population-level demographic studies, most notably his work in rural China. His baseline assertion is that the standard recommended dietary allowance, roughly 9 to 10% of your daily calories from protein, is entirely sufficient for nearly all human beings. Campbell warns that Western populations wildly exceed this 10% minimum, and his data links this excess consumption of animal protein directly to the promotion of chronic disease. The biological mechanism driving this risk is tied to IGF-1. Insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1, is a hormone that manages blood sugar but also stimulates cellular growth and replication. Higher animal protein intake elevates IGF-1 levels, creating a measurable proxy risk factor for cancer. Because of this, Campbell advocates for a holistic framework. He argues against isolating individual nutrients in a lab, insisting that sticking to whole plant foods produces synergistic protective health benefits that meat cannot replicate. Campbell's data strongly correlates whole plant diets with long-term disease mitigation. However, if an aging adult treats that bare minimum 9% RDA as their optimal target, they risk severe sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is defined as the involuntary progressive loss of skeletal muscle mass and overall physical strength that occurs as we age. When you strip away the extreme rhetoric of pure paleo and pure vegan marketing, a reality check emerges. These two opposing scientists actually share a strict consensus on what you should eliminate from your diet. The first shared sacrifice is dairy. Both experts unequivocally advise against consuming it. Their reasons differ, but the conclusion is the same. Campbell's rodent studies linked tumor growth to high intakes of casein. Casein is the primary protein found in mammalian milk, making up about 80% of the protein in cow's milk. The second shared sacrifice is the total rejection of highly processed foods and modern refined grains. Biologically, removing dairy and refined grains drastically lowers your overall caloric density and strips heavily processed inflammatory markers out of your bloodstream. The irony of the protein debate is that the profound health benefits experienced by followers of both extreme diets are likely driven by the radical elimination of ultra-processed food, rather than the exact percentage of meat they consume. This quadrant chart plots dietary restrictiveness against long-term disease risk reduction. Extreme interpretations of both diets sit on the far edges, requiring immense effort to maintain. But data reveals a moderate middle ground, achieving high long-term impact with a fraction of the restriction. The definitive modern consensus is this: the absolute quantity of protein you eat matters significantly less than the actual source of that protein. The choice isn't simply between meat and plants. It is a biological trade-off between anabolic optimization, building and retaining muscle, and cellular longevity, which focuses on mitigating disease. This flowchart matches diets to physiological priorities. For athletes fighting insulin resistance or muscle loss, lean toward higher protein quantities from extremely lean sources. For cardiovascular health or reversing disease, lean heavily into whole plant sources, adjusting volume slightly upward. For the general public, the most evidence-backed baseline is a diet that emphasizes whole foods, utilizes minimal processing, secures adequate protein, and pulls predominantly from plant-based sources. Ignore the tribalism of the diet industry. Use the modern scientific consensus as your anchor. Review your own clinical lab work and adjust protein intake based on your specific life stage and goals.